Welcome to Military Analytics. The war between Ukraine and Russia has become a phenomenon where drones carry the hopes of freedom to the skies. UAVs, which are in the inventory of the Ukrainian armed forces, are constantly flying over the Ukrainian skies for the surrender practice of the Kiev administration called "I Want to Live." A large part of the soldiers in the Russian army, on the other hand, are unaware of their commanders, or they are waiting for hope from the UAVs they send together with the front commanders for the delivery of the Ukrainian forces. This is perhaps the clearest summary of what Russian leader Vladimir Putin has done to his army. The moments of surrender of the Russian troops to the Ukrainian UAVs have started to be experienced intensively, especially in the eastern Donetsk front lines recently. The latest examples of this situation were seen in the city of Bakhmut, the most active front line of the Donetsk region. Let's witness together the most dramatic moments that the Russians have experienced since the beginning of the war, perhaps until now. In recent days, images from the Bakhmut front line, which cannot match the movies, have come. The moment of a flesh and blood soldier surrendering to a plastic and metal robot was captured on camera. The striking footage came as Kiev forces made significant advances in the Bakhmut region this week. According to Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander General Oleksandr Kursky, Yuri Fedorenko, the commander of the drone in Ukraine's 92nd Mechanized Brigade, shared a video of the peace offer on Telegram. The poignant aerial footage released by the Ukrainian military unconfirmed shows the moment when one of Putin's troops was given the option to surrender. The drone combat aircraft team detected a Russian soldier who asked him not to bomb himself. The aircraft crew left him a note with instructions to surrender and follow a drone. The Russian soldier accepted the note left by the drone, even though his friends fired from behind him. Thus began the adventure of the surrender of the Russian soldier. The soldier went out from his trench to open ground and began to follow the drone. The soldier, advancing with the directions from the unmanned aerial vehicle, walked among his friends who lost their lives on the front lines. The march of the Russian soldier was accompanied by Ukrainian infantrymen and scouts. After the march, the soldier reached the Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Mikhail Fedorov said that the soldier is currently in custody. The most striking detail here is that the Russian soldier surrendered to a drone. Ukraine is calling on Russian soldiers to do just that. According to the reports of the Ukrainian authorities, 3,200 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces in March. More than 4,500 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces in April. According to Vitaly Matviyenko, the number of Russian applications increased by 10% from March to April. In May, this rate increased even more. The main reason for the increase in the number of Russian applicants who wanted to surrender was that Ukraine's counterattack could start at any time. The Russians, who do not ignore this possibility, resort to the compassionate project of Ukraine to save their lives. The offensive of the Ukrainian army, which was expected in May, finally started this week with a big breakthrough. In the past 15 days, the Russian soldiers and army felt much more pressure and experienced a heavy psychological depression. The Ukrainian offensive finally took place with a sudden raid led by the Azov Regiment in Bakhmut. While the Great Offensive, led by the Azov Regiment, continues at full speed, the Russians surrender to the Ukrainian army every second or leave their weapons and flee. It is estimated that nearly 1,000 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Azov Regiment, especially in the last 5 days. Surrender rates in May are at an all-time high, averaging at 200 per day. Vitaly Matviyenko, head of the Ukraine hotline, announced that more than 19,000 Russian applicants have surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces through the project since September began. When we consider all this data, we can clearly understand that there is a serious decline in the Russian army. Breakthroughs in the Russian army are increasing day by day. A blow to the Russian army, which is shaken by the surrendered soldiers, comes from the Kiev forces on the front lines. The Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade is believed to have led the offensive that resulted in Russian troops fleeing Bakhmut. The Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade is the new formation of the Azov Regiment, the tanks of the Ukrainian Azov Regiment, with its new name. The 3rd Taras Brigade also provides support as a result of the joint operations of the tanks and the brigade. The Russian forces are forced to withdraw at the same time. Footage from the front line seems to confirm Ukraine's reports of a successful counterattack around Bakhmut. According to conflict analyst Igor Sushko, the Ukrainian army has recaptured about 7.8 kilometers squared of the city in recent clashes. According to the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground, the 6th and 8th divisions of the Russian army and the 72nd Brigade were defeated. So in which regions, and how do the Russians surrender? What measures is Ukraine taking for the surrender of the Russians guaranteeing their lives? The head of the Ukraine hotline, Vitaly Matvienko, noted that the calls came mainly from the Moscow and Leningrad regions, as well as Chelyabinsk, Novgorod, and occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. Last month, the Ukrainian military released an instructional video explaining how to surrender to a wave to the Russians. The Ukrainian army has released an instructional video for Russian soldiers with a step-by-step guide on how to surrender to one of the drones. The video comes as part of Ukraine's I Want to Live project, a hotline that encourages Russians who do not want to fight in Ukraine to surrender. Soldiers who surrender are instructed to call the I Want to Live hotline to pre-arrange the time and place of the meeting. After the location of the soldiers are verified, the soldiers must go to the specified place at the exact time specified. Once the soldiers are in place, they should wait for the drone to appear. If the drone has not appeared, soldiers should wait for further instructions. When the soldiers see the UAV in the field of view, they have to make eye contact with it. Soldiers must then raise their arms and signal that they are ready to follow. After that, the drone will move up and down a few meters before moving at walking speed towards the closest representatives of the Ukrainian army. Finally, the drone will liberate the Russian soldiers who want to surrender. Ukraine wants to prove that salvation is so easy and close with a video it has published. In addition, the I Want to Live project initiated by Ukraine reconnected tens of thousands of Russian soldiers to life. Ukrainian authorities reported that a website called I Want to Live, created for the Russian soldiers who wanted to surrender, had attracted nearly 20 million visitors in the last 8 months. The I Want to Live hotline receives an average of 80 calls a day from people in Russia or the occupied territory of Ukraine who don't want to die for Putin's dreams and are willing to surrender. In addition, Ukraine developed new strategies to persuade Russian soldiers to surrender and displayed remarkable creativity. Konstantin Melnikov, a war correspondent who is often on the front lines, said that the Ukrainian army designs its own advertising campaigns. Melnikov said Ukrainian troops printed special leaflets, loaded them into shells, and fired them in Russian-occupied territory with a Grad rocket launcher. The brochures also contain phone numbers that Russians can call if they want to turn themselves in. A price list showing how much money you can make if you surrender with equipment is also included in the brochures. Soldiers who deliver a tank can receive a $10,000 payment. Analysts say that unlike Russia, the rights of prisoners of war in Ukraine are respected. Ukraine's respect for the rights of prisoners of war is another detail that attracts Russian soldiers. This humanitarian stance of Ukraine paves the way for the surrender of more Russian soldiers. As a result, given the increasing rate of giving up from Vladimir Putin's war and surrendering to the Ukrainians, it's not surprising that drones will capture many more prisoners of war in the weeks and months to come. The real question here is how Vladimir Putin will deal with these surrenders. We will wait and see what the Russian leader's reaction to this humiliating situation will be. Russia has been experiencing unexpected events since the day it invaded Ukraine. Ukraine's successful progress in the war starts a new era. The Russia-Ukraine war is moving to Russian territory. These developments are causing frightening moments for the Russian people. The tension in Russia is increasing day by day. Putin's plans are not working as he wants. How did this war move to Russia? What is causing the tense atmosphere in Russia? The Russian government had boldly declared that it would start a war against Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine was so underestimated by Russia that it was thought that the war would be over in a very short time. But the Ukrainian army managed to foil the plans of the Russian government one by one. The Kremlin government, which was confident in the strength of the Russian army, was surprised by the resistance of the Ukrainian army. Russia reached out that it would win this war without any casualties, does not know what to do now. Explosions are frequent in Russia these days. There has been explosions at 2 important Russian military airports. The Ukrainian army is not claiming responsibility for these explosions, but millions of people following this war believe that the explosions were carried out by the Ukrainian army. These explosions on Russian territory are likely to give a new direction to the war. The Russian government is unable to prevent the explosions. The Russian people are forced to live in fear. One of the explosions took place at Ryazan military airport southeast of Moscow. It is known that 3 people died and 6 people were injured as a result of the explosion of a fuel tanker at Ryazan military airport. The fuel tanker, which continued to burn for hours, caused difficulties in extinguishing it. The Russian government could hardly extinguish this fire. The other explosion took place at a military airport in Saratov region. Russian military aircraft were based at this airport. As a result of the explosion in the region, Russian military aircraft were damaged. But this explosion not only caused damage, it also caused panic in the Russian military. After the damage to Russian military aircraft, a state of emergency was declared in Russia. Security measures were increased at military bases. This explosion was unexpected by the Russian military because it was very difficult for Ukraine to carry out this explosion. This area is located far from the missile range of the Ukrainian army. Then Ukraine did not claim responsibility for the explosions in Russia. Russia said it would investigate the source of these incidents. So far, however, the Kremlin has not said anything other than accidental about any of the explosions. No one has found this investigation credible. Russia knows very well that it will lose face if it says that these attacks were carried out by Ukraine. The unpreventable explosions are making the Russian people angry against Putin. If Ukraine claims responsibility for the explosions, or if Ukrainian intelligence is found to be the source, this anger of the Russian people is sure to increase. The Russian government has almost no support anymore. The casualties in the Russian army and the explosions on Russian soil are varying. To people's patience to the limit. The statements of Putin's opponents are becoming harsher. Russian citizens do not hesitate to criticize Putin. Every day, Russian squares organized protests against the war and Putin's government in the squares where millions of people gather. Russian people are trying to make their voices heard to the world. Putin cannot suppress the reactions of the Russian people at the moment, thinking that these reactions will end if he wins the war. Putin is trying to manipulate the Russian people by not sharing the real information about the war. The Russian people are now learning the real information about Russia's losses from the data shared by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. The Russian press is trying to gain the support of its citizens by making false news that the war is progressing in favor of Russia. However, Russian citizens can learn the real information by actively using social media. According to the data shared by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, Russia's total losses since the start of the war are as follows: 108,190 Russian military personnel, 3,036 tanks, 6,100 armored vehicles, 233 artillery systems, 283 airplanes, 270 helicopters, 16 military ships, 723 cruise missiles, 1839 unmanned aerial vehicles. Today alone, 750 Russian military personnel were killed. 5 tanks, 7 armored vehicles, 6 artillery systems, 1 helicopter and 3 drones were destroyed. War experts say that these explosions in Russia could have been caused by Ukrainian drones. The Ukrainian army uses Bayraktar drones, the world's most advanced drone technology. These drones have become one of the most effective weapons of the war. Bayraktar drones cannot be detected by radar systems due to their high-altitude capability. Ukraine has managed to disrupt many clients of the Russian army by using disadvantage, by constantly monitoring Russian soldiers with these drones. The Ukrainian army facilitated their operations in the occupied territories since the beginning of the war. 3,036 Russian tanks have been destroyed using Bayraktar drones. These tanks were the Russian army's most powerful ground operation piece by destroying Russia's tanks. Ukraine gained a crucial advantage in the war. The biggest reason why the explosions in Russia are thought to have been carried out by Bayraktar drones is that these drones can stay in the air for 27 hours continuously. Thanks to this feature of the drones, even operations at very long distances can be successful. In addition to all their features, these drones can also record video footage. These videos are constantly shared by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The videos of the operations are proof of the defeat of the Russian army unable to prevent attacks in Russia. The government lives in fear. Since the attacks cannot be prevented, security measures are being increased. Explosions are important. Military installations and oil fields are causing enormous damage to the Russian economy. When the war is over, the world may be faced with a collapsed Russian economy. The Russian economy is forced to increase its oil and gas sales to avoid bankruptcy. But the successive explosions are disrupting Russia's transfer operations. In just 3 days, Russia has lost millions of dollars. It seems very difficult for the Russian economy to recover now. Russian citizens are very angry about the situation they are exposed to because of the war. It is known that even the basic necessities of the markets in Russia are raised every day. There is only one name that the people blame for this situation: Putin. The Russian leader has less than 30% of supporters, according to polls conducted in Russia. Putin's opponents have not been this angry for years. Russia is going through its most difficult days since 1999. There is already talk about who will replace Putin. It is almost certain that Putin's political career will be over after the war ends. This may change if the war in Ukraine ends in Russia's favor, but the course of the war is not looking good for Russia. The Ukrainian army's successes are increasing day by day. The Ukrainian Air Force Command announced that since the beginning of the war, they have intercepted a total of 1893 airstrikes in the past few days. It managed to intercept 32 missile attacks in just 1 day. The fact that the Ukrainian army is so close to victory is important for Zelensky. Putin's helplessness in the face of Zelensky, a new leader, is causing the Russian people to lose faith. If the Russian government fails to prevent the attacks, it will have to resign at the end of the war. The only solution for Putin's political career is to win this war. What do you think about the explosions in Russia? What impact do they have on the course of the war? The war in Ukraine mobilized the whole of Europe socio-economically, diplomatically, and militarily, while Europe entered a great arms race as a precaution against the side effects of the war. Europe's weak armies began to be fed with the most powerful war machines. Europe was aware that it could not keep itself safe or suppress Russian aggression simply by providing military aid to Ukraine. Along with Ukraine, there was a Russia that threatened Eastern Europe. At any moment, NATO troops in Eastern Europe concentrated on the border of Ukraine and Belarus about 20 days before the start of the war. The country that stood out as the main actor was Poland. Poland, which is thought to be the biggest reflection of the leap of the war in terms of geographical location, made very serious attempts in terms of defense. As the eastern wing of NATO, Poland is located in the key strategic geography. While Poland was sending its own tanks to Ukraine without hesitation, it also tried to establish Europe's most powerful tank, Army Air Fleet, and armored troops 4th generation K2 Panther tanks, F-35 multi-role fighters, 22 Raptors, American high-mobility artillery, rocket systems, Patriot air defense systems, and many more powerful war machines began to enter the inventory of the Polish army. The most important initiative of the Polish government was the purchase of the U.S. M1A1 and M1A2 CPV-3 Abrams tanks. Let's take a look at the striking details of the deployment of Europe's most powerful tank army on the Russian and Belarusian borders. Poland signed an agreement last year to buy second batch of Abrams tanks worth $1.4 billion. The agreement envisions the delivery of 116 M1A1 Abrams tanks and related equipment and logistics starting this year. Thus, together with the first batch of 250 M1A2S CPV main battle tanks, the total number of Abrams tanks in Poland will be increased to 366, significantly increasing the strength of the Polish ground forces in the context of the Russian war in neighboring Ukraine. Currently, Poland is trying to build the most powerful tank army in Europe. Poland is deploying to the borders of Kaliningrad, Belarus, and Ukraine, especially against Russian aggression. So far, Poland has received at least 3 batches of M1A2 Abrams AV3. Recently, the first batches of M1A1 CPV-2116 Abrams have arrived in Poland, and the Times M1A1 versions will be updated to SCPV-3. In addition to parties of the world's most advanced main battle tank, K2 have already arrived in Ukraine. Polish Abrams will be XSM-1 Abrams, specifically the M1A1 SA. They will replace the 232 T-72s donated to Ukraine at a ratio of 1:2 and will eventually be upgraded to the M1A2 CPV-3 standard. Officials said Poland was the first U.S. ally in Europe to receive Abrams tanks. Poland has already received American high-mobility artillery, rocket systems, and Patriot missile batteries. Poland now gives all these tanks and has sent a large part of its army, especially to the Kaliningrad border. Kaliningrad is of critical importance for the Russian Federation. Kaliningrad, which has no connection with Russian mainland, witnessed a series of sensational events after Russia annexed 4 regions in Ukraine. On the one hand, NATO forces blockaded Kaliningrad from the land and sea, and on the other, Poland and the Czech Republic started a series of mock events against Russia's unjust annexation of Ukraine. About the unnecessariness of Kaliningrad being Russian territory, we will examine all the details shortly, but we need to examine the importance of giving these tanks to Poland by the USA. The United States and Poland are forging an increasingly close national security and military relationship. Poland is the cornerstone of NATO's East Flank defense. This is why the Pentagon deployed forces and supplies there. This is why Washington is willing to sell Poland top-notch equipment such as the Abrams M1 main battle tank. Interoperability between the U.S. and Polish armed forces, as U.S. equipment has been adopted by the Polish military to advance interoperability, to improve NATO's strategic readiness, develop its forces, and enhance the defense industry capacity of the West. The two countries should take the next step to establish an industrial facility in Poland to enable the assembly of Abrams tanks purchased by Warsaw. Poland's geographic location at the center of NATO's eastern flank, its willingness to host U.S. forces, and its commitment to building a large and modern army make it a particularly valuable ally. The United States' commitment to the security of Poland and the rest of the alliance was reflected in its decision several years ago to deploy significant forces and capabilities there. US forces in Poland include forward-deployed elements of an Army divisional headquarters, rotational deployment of an armored brigade combat team, pre-deployed equipment for a 2nd APC logistics unit, and a squadron of MQ-9 Reaper drones. The Biden administration recently took an additional step establishing headquarters in Poland, the first permanent U.S. military facility. This headquarters was for the U.S. 5th Corps. Poland is not just a passive recipient of U.S. forces. Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it was one of a handful of NATO countries that not only met but exceeded the alliance's target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. Most of its current defense investment dollars are spent on Western, particularly American equipment. Poland has also signed contracts to purchase some of the top U.S. capabilities, including 35 stealth fighters, Patriot air defense systems, HIMARS rocket launchers, and attack helicopters. One of the key systems Poland has purchased is the M1 Abrams MBD. The war in Ukraine underlined the urgent need to replace the Polish army. Soviet-era military equipment with advanced Western systems. But the Polish army believes it needs additional platforms, including more MBDS, additional multiple rocket launchers, and long-range guns. Therefore, Warsaw turned its face toward South Korea. Earlier this year, Warsaw signed an agreement together with Seoul. Agreements have been reached for around 1,000 K2 MBDS, hundreds of multiple rocket launchers, mobile artillery pieces, as well as 50 light attack aircraft. South Korea has also pledged to establish a tank assembly plant in Poland. Although Polish sources have indicated that they would prefer to purchase additional U.S. equipment, the U.S. defense industry base is, in most cases, not ready to rapidly produce the required equipment in the required number. In the immediate aftermath of the Ukraine war, there was an explosion in demand for HIMARS. Lockheed Martin, the maker of the system, is making a tremendous effort to rapidly increase production from 60 to 96 units per year. While Warsaw has an urgent need for more military hardware, purchasing systems from South Korea may not be the best solution. As for the K2 tanks, the first 10 tanks will be delivered immediately, while the remainder of the order will be delivered over the next 4 years. Also, since this is the first overseas sale of the K2, South Korean Hyundai Rotem has no experience supporting a foreign buyer or establishing an empty co-production facility in a foreign country. There are other reasons to worry about the Polish-South Korean deal. Interoperability with U.S. forces and the presence of U.S. armor in Poland will reduce both the operational and industrial advantages and possible sales of Abrams tanks to other Eastern European countries. Additionally, the Polish military will now have to operate and maintain multiple MBTs. The U.S. may provide Poland with additional Abrams MBT. The Polish government should consider options to get more of the world's best MBT for Warsaw. It seems logical to buy as many M1s as possible instead of splitting the supply, because the biggest clear threat to Warsaw will come from Russia. This threat's arrival fuels the desire to further increase the number of M1 Abrams tanks that can be used against the Russians. At the same time, some war experts argue that there is even a possibility that M1 Abrams may be transferred to Ukraine in the event of a crisis. Even if such a thing does not seem politically and strategically possible, it is enough to deter the Kremlin from some moves, including the possibility of disclaim. The presence of these tanks in the region strengthens NATO's hand against Russia. This also precludes the claims that Russia will target Eastern Europe after Ukraine before February last year.